Epps, thanks for joining us. You're the International Director of the IDSF, Israel Defense Security Forum. We want to talk about the Jewish vote. It's very critical in the U.S. election coming up in just a few days. Tell us, first of all, what is the Jewish vote?
Thank you so much, Chris. Pleasure being here. The Jewish vote is, obviously it's the vote of hundreds of thousands of Jews all across America, obviously very heavily concentrated in New York, in New Jersey, but also in the very important swing state of Pennsylvania. People always talk about swing voters. Who are the swing voters? And you'll see on media will put up a group of swing voters. We're all going to. It's really hard to imagine how many people at this time are really sitting there and saying, I don't think I know enough about Trump, or I don't know enough about Harris. My vote could go either way. The one group of people who actually potentially feel that way are Jews, and particularly Jews coming from more of a center-left background. Those Jews who naturally would never vote for Trump and would naturally vote for Democrats have unfortunately had to exist over this past year, where they saw a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism that was tolerated and to some extent even advanced by certain members of the Democratic Party.
So they're very conflicted right now?
Absolutely, very conflicted. And that is a group of people who, on the one hand, may go ahead and vote for Harris, but many of them are probably going to be pulling the trigger for Trump.
And why would they go for Trump?
Going for Trump because they see the way that the Democrats have ignored the anti-Semitism that is growing within their midst. They understand now that it's not coincidental. It comes from their rhetoric. It comes from enabling an anti-Israel mentality. It comes from enabling a BDS and a kind of a delegitimization of Israel that has been allowed to metastasize within the Democratic Party for so long, and that now in 2024, when there is a war, you see the amount of vitriolic anti-Israelism and the lack of trust and the belief, frankly, not just in against Israel, but the belief in our enemies, in terrorists. That is something they just can't look away from. And it's forcing many people almost against their will to vote for Trump.
You've been a political consultant, political analyst. You mentioned Pennsylvania. Why is Pennsylvania so, obviously it's one of the key battleground states, but what role does the Jewish vote have in Pennsylvania?
Well, there are significant Jewish populations in both Philadelphia and both Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, obviously, a few years ago, there was a terrible shooting at a synagogue there. So there is really a real association with anti-Semitism and Pennsylvania. Obviously, University of Pennsylvania was one of those colleges that were subpoenaed and really acted horribly in front of the entire U.S. public by Elise Stefanik and her committee that showed that the University of Pennsylvania and other schools were allowing a huge amount of anti-Semitism to take place on their campuses, endangering many American Jewish students, and created really a hostile environment. So Pennsylvania, for those reasons, are significant to the Jewish population. And from the nation, when it comes to the election, there are only a handful of states that really could go either Republican or Democrat. Last election, I don't remember the numbers, but in 2020, it was about 25,000 were the votes between Trump and Biden. And that seemed to be the state that made the difference. Easily could be the case again. If you remember, back when Harris was trying to figure out who was going to be her potential vice presidential candidate, one of the names, and probably the name that came in second place, was Governor Josh Shapiro.
That's right, exactly.
Jewish governor of Pennsylvania, someone who was seen until he was promoting himself as a VP candidate as someone who was strongly supportive of Israel. But in order to get the support of his party, he backed away from much of his support of Israel. And that, again, was seen as so obvious that he was pandering, that for many American Jews, Democrats, very uncomfortable for them, very off-putting for them, and it really hardened that position that right now the Democratic Party is somewhat hostile to Jews and the pro-Israel mentality. And I think that you'll see Pennsylvania, many of all the states in the country, the amount of American Jews who will probably vote for Trump, will switch from voting for Biden to Trump, will probably be the most in Pennsylvania, a state that has really seen a lot of anti-Semitism, and a state that also understands that they were really at the fulcrum of the election.
Yeah. Last question, Ali. What about the vote here, the Jewish vote, the Americans here living in Israel, they're dual citizens, and they're voting? How do you see that vote going?
Yeah, well, there are probably about 400,000 Americans who are here in Israel. Probably within the state of Pennsylvania, almost 25,000 there, so a significant amount there. There is a tremendous desire to vote, to weigh in. You see over the last year the impact that American foreign policy has on the lives of American citizens living in Israel. So I think we'll see a tremendous outpouring of support of A, to vote, but also B, voting against the administration and in favor of a new approach, an approach that hopefully will empower Israel and the U.S. to be aligned and understanding that we're fighting against a similar enemy, the Iranian regime.
Yeah, well, great analysis, and we'll see what happens this coming Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you so much.